One of the greatest tragedies of life is the transience of relationships. The backyards of our memories are littered with the detritus of faded relationships. Some that exploded, some that fermented into resentment, some that budded, blossomed and died, leaving no more than a couple of translucent petals to let you know they were ever there at all. There are some friendships that were so important that just fell away for no greater reason than you stopped sending them messages. These are people that, for a short time, were at the centre of your life, and now you barely think about them. Someone wryly saying "have a nice life" as they depart is one of the saddest things in the world. They open up a door with that phrase, and on the other side of that door is the emptiness of forever, that you will lie in the ground having never seen that person again. Whether they be an extra or a featured artist in the movie of your life, they will walk off set and fade. They don't even appear in a post-credit scene, and that's because there aren't any post-credit scenes. Whether it's a feature of modern life or something hard-coded into our software, the majority of our relationships are minor ripples on our timeline. So few of these people we've known and liked accompany us for any length of time, and it's only in reflection that you lament all of those people. People who've made you roar with laughter or entranced you that you'll probably never see again. You sometimes think about them. You sometimes have moments of reverie on rainy afternoons, thinking of those faded people, watching raindrops race each other down a window pane. Then life knocks on the door and tells you need to come now. You head off into the world, and these phantom relationships settle back into your memory. I had a friend who I spent most of my time with between the ages of 11 and 15. We experienced so many formative things together. Experience ripped fresh from the tree and guzzled down in each other's company. The taste of beer, the mugginess of weed, horror movies, and hours walking and seeing and getting settled into the world. Not only was he witness to my experience, but he helped to form it. We forget this. That we build each other as we grow up together. We add pieces of ourselves to our friends and they to us. Think about this and smile, because it's a hell of a gift. Long before we have kids ourselves, we help to make people and in turn are made by them. We are not just the products of our parents, but of everyone we've ever met. Architect and building at the same time. This friend had a book. I remember the cover of the book, and more than that, I remember the fascination I had with the cover of that book the first time I saw it. It was brashly colourful, and the art was energetic in a too much caffeine kind of way. In the centre of the picture was an old-style treasure chest with hundreds of little legs being ridden by a wizard and a little kid with Coke bottle glasses. I remember the title because it was obviously a joke, but one that was completely above my head. It was called Faust, but the title had been scrubbed out and replaced with the word Eric. The front cover of this book was my first experience of the art of Josh Kirby and the writing of Terry Pratchett. This book cover was bewitching, but what really attracted me to Pratchett was when I was told that death was a recurring character. I'd always leant towards the theatrically goth, and the promise of a novel set in the House of Death intrigued me. I started at the beginning though. I whizzed through The Colour of Magic, The Light Fantastic, and Equal Rights so I could get to Maud. The book sticks with me more for the promise of it rather than the actual book itself. These early books are Pratchett learning his trade before he got really settled down into the world of his novels. The early Discworld is more like a sketch, a conceit, rather than a real place with dirt between the flagstones. Though the Discworld would always be an analogue for the world he saw outside of his window,
It would, over time, develop texture, and, like Ankh-Morpork was built on the former structures of Ankh-Morpork, the Discworld itself would be erected on the scaffolding that was these early novels. One-off jokes like the librarian being transformed into an orangutan would continue to be developed and expanded until they became the load-bearing pillars of the world he'd created. For instance, the Granny Weatherwax that crops up in Equal Rights is nothing like the many-faceted heroine of the later novels. That's not to say these early books are bad, it's just that you don't fall in love with the people that inhabit his world until he got into his groove a bit. We hold a lot more store in the past than the present. Any old tripe will develop the patina of respectability if it hangs around long enough. I point you towards the murderous absurdity of the Abrahamic faiths for this. When I was at school, the English literature curriculum was a federally consecrated example of the idea that older was better. That's why I read a lot of old stuff, books filled with starched collars and breaches of etiquette. Since the death of Roald Dahl, I hadn't had a contemporary writer whose new book I anticipated. Then I discovered Pratchett. I loved his books, and he was prolific. After I'd caught up, I'd barely have to wait 6 months before a beautifully bound Terry Pratchett hardback would drive me to the bookshop. I was a second-hand book creeper. I've never had any money, and so I would resort to the dog-eared and the fluid-stained to keep up with my reading, but I would save my money for Pratchett hardbacks, as it seemed so unjust to have to wait for them to go through the hands of others. Pratchett's novels, well, they've been a constant for me, no matter where I've lived, no matter who I've loved, no matter how many of my friends and family are still breathing. Terry Pratchett's novels have held my hand through life and helped to shield me from the grey uniformity of the world. There are so many reasons to admire Terry Pratchett's writing. Firstly, he's compellingly readable. He uses a structure of disparate plots that crash together at the denouement. His books are a masterclass in structure and never fail to sweep up the reader and carry them along. To write prose that is consistently compelling is a skill that Pratchett mastered. Ideas and themes are nothing if the prose is opaque and unreadable. Pratchett never diluted his ideas, but wrote in such a way that you would have to devour every one of his books. These were no mere airport page-turners, though. His books were dissertations on character and what it is to be a good person in a bad world. Even though the Discworld is a reverential world, the characters, well, they never felt like ciphers. They never felt like they were personifications of ideas. He created characters that you wanted to spend time with, people who you would grow to love for their flaws as well as their virtues. These weren't the facile, 2D projections of the social media age that we've all transformed ourselves into, but real people with real faults. The Discworld rested on the twin pillars of Sam Vimes and Granny Weatherwax. These two characters, more than any others, highlight Pratchett's talent for humanising imperfection. Both Vimes and Weatherwax are imperfect heroes, one always on the verge of having anger consume them, and the other in a constant state of affrontment at the world for not having the sense that she possesses. They hold up the virtue of the world in spite of those flaws, and spend a large part of their time fighting their own worst impulses. They both live and thrive on sheer bloody-mindedness that conceals an essential goodness that compels them towards the moral. They have love for the world and the goodness in the world, and they seek to protect it. It's their lack of perfection that makes them plausible and likeable heroes, and their concerns are our concerns, primarily the well-being of their family and friends. There's a lot that popular culture can learn from Pratchett's heroes, the most important one being that perfection is dull. It is so clear that Terry Pratchett understood people and imbued his characters with a humanity that is so often absent in genre fiction. There are no rippling muscles here, but sinew and resolve and an adaptable conception of what is right. The moral landscape of his heroes grow, and as a result his characters develop like real people. What we really see in Pratchett, though, is an unshakable optimism. The idea that we are essentially good and we're heading in the right direction. I am as big a fan of the nihilistic and cynical as the next person, but I can never fail to be swayed by Pratchett's faith in our essential goodness and his surety that we can build a better future together. That's not to say he's without anger. He had nothing but contempt for the wantonly violent and malicious, and he saves his scorn for those who thrive on the misery of others or waste human life. This was palpable in his novel Monstrous Regiment, a furious riposte to the Second Gulf War. It is soaked in the fury at the futility and senselessness of war. It's Pratchett at his angriest and most compelling. I was probably still suffering from the overindulgence of my birthday 2 days before, but I awoke on the morning of March the 12th, 2015, to the news of Terry Pratchett's death, and I cried. I've experienced a lot of death in my life. I've heard a Bible's worth of priestly platitudes over the coffins of my relatives, and so I'm fully aware of what grief is, and I know the difference between that and someone who I've never met before dying. Why Terry Pratchett then? Why does he still remain the only celebrity death I've ever shed tears over? It's simple. It's because he's always been there, through my pimples and my grey hairs, my successes and failures, my loves and heartbreaks. There he's been. Consistently funny, consistently touching, consistently brilliant. So much in life is transient, so much flashes by, so many of those people who make you laugh or enthrall you disappear. But he had always been there for such a large portion of my life, and then he was gone. I'll never read another word of his. People I love, like Sam Vimes, Granny Weatherwax and Mushroom Ridcully, have been silenced. These are the thoughts that washed over me in an instant on March the 12th, 2015. But not just that. A flood of images from a life spent reading his work. The faces of so many people who I'd loved and hadn't spoken to in years. I cried not just at the death of one of my favourite writers, but at the transience of life and the transience of love. In his death, I saw my own, and I mourned myself. But enough about me. Terry Pratchett's goodness shone out of every word he wrote, and to have him sat around my gaming table would be a dream that can never be realised. But this is the beauty of people who create. I'll always have his words, and every time I read them, I will be that mouthy little bastard kid, that drunken 25-year-old, and this disappointed 43-year-old, all at once, and I can revel in something that remains, and that's thanks to one of the sweetest and most humane writers of our age. Thanks, Terry.